In the summer of 1991, the world seemed boundless and full of promise. Jeremy, a wiry young man with a mop of dark hair and an insatiable curiosity, had just turned 21. His best friend, Claire, a spirited woman with fiery red hair and an infectious laugh, had convinced him to join her on a weekend camping trip to Blackwood Forest. The forest was known for its sprawling greenery, ancient trees, and an air of mystery that drew adventurers and dreamers alike. "It'll be fun," Claire had said, her green eyes sparkling with excitement. "We'll escape the noise of the city, breathe fresh air, and maybe even find that old cabin everyone talks about." Jeremy had hesitated at first. He wasn't much of an outdoorsman, preferring the comfort of his books and records to the unpredictability of nature. But Claire's enthusiasm was contagious, and he found himself agreeing, more for her sake than his own. The drive to Blackwood Forest took them deep into the countryside. They left the paved roads behind, navigating dirt paths that twisted and turned through rolling hills and dense thickets. By the time they arrived at the forest's edge, the sun hung low in the sky, casting golden rays through the canopy of trees. "This is it," Claire announced, parking her old Volkswagen Beetle. She hopped out, stretching her arms wide as if to embrace the wilderness. Jeremy followed, squinting at the towering trees that seemed to reach endlessly into the heavens. They loaded their backpacks with supplies: a tent, sleeping bags, a flashlight, a map, and enough food to last the weekend. Claire had also packed her Polaroid camera, eager to capture their adventure. Together, they set off on the narrow trail that wound its way into the heart of the forest. The first few hours were magical. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, painting the forest floor in dappled patterns of light and shadow. Birds sang from the treetops, and the air was filled with the earthy scent of moss and pine. Claire led the way, snapping photos and chattering about the legends surrounding Blackwood Forest. "They say this place is haunted," she said, her voice tinged with mock seriousness. "Apparently, a hermit lived here decades ago. People claimed he was a sorcerer or something. He disappeared one day, and no one ever found him." Jeremy rolled his eyes. "Sounds like something out of a bad horror movie." "Maybe," Claire replied, grinning. "But wouldn't it be cool if we found his cabin? Imagine the stories we could tell." As evening approached, they found a small clearing near a babbling brook and decided to set up camp. Jeremy pitched the tent while Claire gathered firewood. Soon they had a crackling fire, its warm glow warding off the encroaching darkness. Over a dinner of canned beans and granola bars, they talked and laughed, the forest around them alive with the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. When the fire died down, they crawled into their tent, exhaustion pulling them into a deep sleep. Jeremy awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of something moving outside the tent. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the noise was too deliberate, footsteps crunching through the underbrush. "Claire," he whispered, shaking her shoulder. She stirred, groggy and annoyed. "What is it?" she mumbled. "There's something out there," he said, his voice barely audible. Claire sat up, listening. The footsteps had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Even the crickets had gone quiet. "It's probably just an animal," she said, though her tone betrayed a hint of unease. Jeremy wasn't convinced. "Should we check?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. Grabbing the flashlight, she unzipped the tent and peered outside. Jeremy followed, his heart pounding. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees and underbrush. There was nothing there. "See," Claire said, trying to sound confident. "It's nothing." But as they turned to go back inside, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness. Jeremy cursed under his breath, fumbling with the light. That's when they heard it. A low, guttural growl coming from the trees. Claire froze, her hand gripping Jeremy's arm. "What was that?" she whispered. Before he could answer, a shadow moved in the corner of his vision. It was large and fast, disappearing into the darkness before he could get a good look. We need to go, Jeremy said, his voice trembling. Claire nodded and they scrambled back into the tent, zipping it up tightly. They sat in silence listening to the night. The growl didn't come again, but neither of them slept for the rest of the night. The next morning the forest seemed less inviting. The sunlight that had once felt warm and comforting now seemed harsh, casting long shadows that danced ominously in the breeze. Jeremy and Claire packed up their camp quickly, deciding to cut their trip short. Let's just head back to the car, Jeremy said. We can come back another time. Claire didn't argue. She was unusually quiet, her usual cheerfulness replaced by a somber demeanor. They retraced their steps along the trail, but as the hours passed, they began to realize something was wrong. This doesn't look familiar, Claire said, glancing at the map. We should have reached the car by now. Jeremy frowned, looking around. The forest seemed different, as if it had shifted overnight. The trees were denser, the trail narrower. Panic began to creep in. Maybe we took a wrong turn, he suggested, though he didn't believe it. The map showed only one trail leading back to the car. As they pressed on, the sense of unease grew. The forest was unnaturally quiet, the only sounds their own footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves. Then they came across something that made them stop in their tracks. It was a cabin, nestled among the trees. Its wooden walls were weathered and moss-covered, the windows dark and empty. It looked as though it had been abandoned for decades. Is this? Claire began, her voice barely above a whisper. Jeremy nodded, his mouth dry. The hermit's cabin. Despite their fear, curiosity got the better of them. They approached cautiously, the wooden steps creaking under their weight. The door was slightly ajar, revealing a dim interior. Claire pushed it open and they stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of decay. The cabin was small, with a single room containing a rickety bed, a table, and a fireplace. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, their meanings unknown. On the table sat an old leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. Claire reached for the book, but Jeremy stopped her. "Don't," he said, his voice firm. "We shouldn't touch anything." But it was too late. As Claire opened the book, a cold wind swept through the cabin, extinguishing the light streaming through the doorway. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly, and a deep guttural voice echoed around them. "You should not have come." Jeremy and Claire froze, terror gripping them. The voice was unlike anything they had ever heard, ancient and otherworldly. The cabin began to shake, the walls creaking and groaning as if alive. "Run!" Jeremy shouted, grabbing Claire's hand. They bolted out of the cabin, the door slamming shut behind them. The forest seemed to come alive, branches clawing at them as they ran. The growl from the previous night returned, louder and closer. They didn't stop until they burst into another clearing, gasping for breath. Jeremy looked around, trying to get his bearings. The trail was nowhere to be seen. "We're lost," Claire said, her voice shaking. Jeremy didn't respond. He was staring at something in the distance. The cabin. Somehow they had ended up back where they started. The rest of the day was a blur of fear and confusion. No matter which direction they went, they always ended up back at the cabin. It was as if the forest itself was conspiring against them, trapping them in an endless loop. As night fell, they had no choice but to return to the clearing and set up camp. Neither of them spoke, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. Jeremy kept the flashlight close, its beam their only defense against the encroaching darkness. But the night brought no solace. The growl returned, closer than ever. Shadows moved among the trees, too large to be animals. And then just before dawn they heard the voice again. "Leave." It was a command filled with malice and power. Jeremy and Claire huddled together, too terrified to move. When the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, the voice fell silent, and the forest seemed to relax. "We have to find a way out," Claire said, her voice hoarse. "We can't stay here." Jeremy nodded, determination replacing his fear. We'll follow the sun. It has to lead us somewhere. With renewed resolve, they set off, keeping the rising sun at their backs. The forest resisted them, but they pushed on, driven by desperation. Hours passed, and just when they were about to give up, they stumbled onto a dirt road. The sight of the road brought tears to their eyes. They followed it, and soon they saw Claire's car parked where they had left it. Relief washed over them as they climbed inside, not daring to look back at the forest. As they drove away, Jeremy glanced in the rearview mirror. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure standing at the forest's edge, watching them. But when he looked again, it was gone. Neither of them spoke during the drive home. The forest had taken something from them, something they couldn't quite put into words. They never returned to Blackwood Forest, and the cabin remained a dark memory, a reminder of the unknown forces that lurk just beyond the edge of reason.